Welcome back to Clear the Mechanism with your host, Coach Ryan Vondercheck, and we have another special appearance today. Everyone's favorite co-host. He made his first appearance last time. We got the one and only Smiley, because anytime that you see Smiley, you can't be upset. So happy to have my co-host, but at the same time, very, very excited for this episode. Once again, just like all the episodes prior, it's someone who I've had a pretty good relationship with. And I'm just very, very excited to share this opportunity and how not only he's impacting the game of youth baseball, but just baseball in general through all these different steps that he's taken in his life. Today, I have the one and only 80/20 podcast man himself, Coach Bo Ashabraner. Bo, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. So I'm just really excited to kind of get into this, let you kind of share your story. I don't want to leave anything out, so I'm not going to hit you with too much of an intro. Whatever you want to talk about from a perspective of life through the game of baseball up to the point where you're at now, let's get after it.
Well, I'm excited to be here with you and Smiley. I had players in the past that I've worked with for years, and they said, looking back, Coach Bo, you smile a lot more than most coaches. So Smiley and I, we relate, and I know you and I, Coach Vondercheck, we relate on so much of this stuff. I'm excited to dive in here.
No, absolutely. So let's kind of start from youth playing career up to kind of Long Beach State, into those different types of opportunities that you had within baseball, and then kind of where that's led you through the 80/20 podcast and then beyond.
Yeah, I'm looking at a magazine right here, Inside Pitch, the Inside Pitch magazine, the ABCA's publication, and on the cover it's Coach Stankiewicz. Yep. You got what looks like you got one that's, I don't know if I have that one lying around here. I got this one right here with Coach Stankiewicz, and on it says, "I'm just a baseball guy." The quote is, "I'm just a baseball guy." And I think that's how I feel. I don't like to think of myself as just a baseball guy. I like to think of myself in 80/20 baseball is based off the 80/20 principle, which is not something I've ever heard talked about in baseball circles. And so I do love pulling from outside of baseball, and that's kind of been a big thing for me. But back in 85, I went to my first baseball game, or 84, 85. I started going to baseball games. I grew up in Southern California, and it's a hotbed, as everybody knows, for baseball. You had the Dodgers, the Angels, and just baseball everywhere. So I started going to games and I just took a loving to baseball. It really was something I knew the lineups, and there's old video of me when I'm 5 years old, reciting the lineups for the Angels and Dodgers. So I've been a baseball guy. I would scorekeep at Dodger games and Angel games. I would do the scorekeeping, and my mom would just get me a scorebook, and I'd scorekeep it. I was 6 years old, scorekeeping games, and my mom says, the people around were like, "That's crazy that a kid likes baseball that much." And so I've always kind of just been, I've loved baseball. I grew up watching VHS, old Dodger VHS from their 88 championships, and along with the Michael Jordans and other football, NFL film stuff. But I just baseball, I would call when I was 11 or 12, I called radio stations and asked baseball questions in LA, some of the big AM stations. Like 690, I would call them up. I didn't tell my parents about it. I'd just call them. I figured out how to get on, and I'd ask them questions about Aaron Seeley or whoever it was. And so I did Little League. My dad coached my Little League team and all the way through Pony League. So I did Little League, started about 1987, and all the way up. My dad was my coach, and he set a really good example. All but 1 year was he my coach, and he set a really good example of how to care about kids, keep things in perspective, stay calm, and really set a good example for how to coach with the right demeanor. And he made sure every kid felt a part of the team and valuable. We had kids that couldn't hit at all, but he taught them how to bunt. We had kids that couldn't play infield at all, but he really tried to get them as good of an outfielder, as catching fly balls as possible, tried to make every player feel valuable. And to this day, I meet up with all my buddies that I grew up with once a year, if not more, but we get together every year. We do a fantasy football draft. We do a wiffle ball game. It's a full day. We got the taco truck come in. It's quite the deal. And in fact, it's in about 3 weeks. And every time I'm there, one of my buddies is like, "Hey, how's your dad? How's Coach Bob? How's Coach Bob doing?" And they have a smile about my dad as a Little League coach and how he made them feel, right? They're going to remember how you made them feel, not so much what you taught them. And so that was a big influence. And then I got to high school in the mid 90s. And fortunately, the high school I went to was pretty much at the very top of all the high schools in the country. And they were 1986 national champions. 87, they were going to be the national champs. They lost the last game at Dodger Stadium, but essentially it was the premier program, if not in California, if not in the country, definitely in California. They had gone to like 6 in a 12-year span from 86 to 98, 6 California championships or Southern California championships, and those were played at Dodger Stadium and Angel Stadium. So, when I was a sophomore, the team was, I think, finished 3rd. I did not contribute to that team. I did get called up for a lot of the things, the tournaments and the playoffs, but it was really great to see that. In fact, the Washington State coach, Coach Choate, was the main pitcher on that team. And he's the Washington State baseball coach, Coach Nathan Choate, great guy. And Tommy Nicholson was the premier player. He was the Southern California Player of the Year. Tommy Nicholson is the coach at UC Davis. So both Division I head coaches now. And there's a whole plethora of other players. The catcher on that team, David Parrish. Does that last name ring a bell? Lance Parrish, obviously. And I grew up, speaking of growing up in our neighborhood, we had Wally Joyner, famous Angels. He lived around the corner. We had Mike Gallego, who's still coaching in the major leagues, have played many years. Parrish went to, Lance Parrish's kids went to school, David and Matt Parrish. Played on the team. So we were just loaded. And so it was a premier program. My head coach was a Hall of Fame coach. He speaks at ABCA convention stuff. So I was really just blessed to have my dad as a Little League coach. Then I go to Esperanza High School, and it's the premier program. And it was a public school too. It was a premier program. It's fallen off now because the enrollment at the time was like 3,000 kids, which was probably the biggest high school in Orange County, California, public high school at least. And it's fallen off because they built other high schools and siphoned off a lot of kids. So, but nevertheless, I was blessed there. And then Long Beach, and then as I got to finishing up high school, Long Beach State showed an interest. I had a lot of interest. Texas, I did a recruiting trip out there with Coach Garrido. Back to growing up in Orange County, my mom would drop me off at Cal State Fullerton baseball games in the mid 90s. She would drop me off, and I would be, there would be weekday games. I would be there, or like a Sunday game, and they would be playing some lesser team. Cal State Fullerton played some great teams, but they also had some, big West opponents that people weren't really interested in seeing. So I would get dropped off, and there would be like 500 people at the game, and I'd be sitting in a section by myself or right behind the dugout. Well, fast forward, I don't know if it was ABCA. I think ABCA came out with their top 50 college baseball teams of all time. It was a big publication, made Baseball America. And who was the number 1 baseball team, college baseball team of all time, ranked the 1995 Cal State Fullerton team, led by Mark Kotze. And so I had a front row seat that I would just get dropped off, there and at the games, and went to all those games. And so that was me. I was sitting there watching the best team, maybe one of the best teams ever, college baseball. And then I played at one of the best, the premier high school in Southern California. I was just blessed to just be around baseball, go to the Dodgers and Angel games all the time. And then I decided on Long Beach State, and I just liked what Long Beach State was all about. At the time when I committed, they were the number 2 ranked team in the country, and they had gone to the College World Series 4 times in the previous 10 years. So they were pretty much there every other year. And I liked the idea of going there and just grinding, working hard. And it was pretty close to home, so my parents could come to all my games, which is a big deal to me. And so then I got drafted out of Long Beach State. I got drafted out of high school. I didn't sign. Great scout, Craig Wiseman, signed a lot of good guys for Tampa Bay over the years. And I decided he knew I was probably going to go to Long Beach State, went to Long Beach State, had a pretty good overall career there, 4 years, had arm problems that came back from kind of when I was in high school, overuse pitching injuries that kind of came back and got me a little bit there, but had a good surgery and it got me, had a really great senior year, got drafted in the 8th round by at the time it was the Indians. In fact, both teams that drafted me have since changed their names. It was the Devil Rays, and now it's the Rays, and it was the Indians, now it's the Guardians. And they drafted me, and had a great scout that I think saw the potential. But so anyways, I go 3 years, 3 parts of 3 seasons. Had a really good second season with the Indians, and ended up being the closer for their A-ball team, their Lake County team, and had a really good year. And then just the arm injuries, that arm problem came back, and I went to Dr. Louis Yoakum, who's since passed away. He was the premier doctor for arms on the West Coast. He was the Dodgers and Angels main guy. Now it's like Elitrosh, and then there was, James Andrew was the East Coast guy. Nobody, back then it was you went to Louis Yoakum. He was at the Curlin and Joe Clinic, and I went to him and I said, "Hey, what do you think about my arm?" He did my original surgery in college, and he said, "Bo, I've done 10,000 arms, and I've never seen one that's as damaged as yours." He goes, "Your ligaments are great. Your ligaments are great, but he goes, I've never seen that many bone chips come out of an elbow. I don't know how you were using your arm." And I think that, testament to my parents kind of raising me, don't complain about things, but it came back to get me. I probably should have said something earlier. You're talking like, I saw I think it was Blake Snell had some bone chips pulled out of his arms, recently, and they pulled out like 2 or 3 or something like that. He said he stopped counting at 20, bone chips. And that kind of goes back to just just maybe too much baseball, too much throwing, and when I was younger. But nevertheless, it was fun to be in the professional game, and it was a good experience. And then I got into coaching while I was still playing professional baseball, and we'll probably talk about that. So as we get going, but that's kind of what led me kind of through my coaching career and kind of baseball from a young age.
It's awesome to really hear everyone's story and how we kind of get to that special place that we are now. And with things like that, there's a lot of different, I guess, opportunities, but at the same time, paths that we kind of have to cross to be able to turn into the best version of ourselves. Through coaching, there's a lot of things that I'm sure that you learn not only through youth but as well as high school ball and college ball, being at Long Beach State, things like that, then obviously into minor league ball. With all that being said, a lot of people, unless they're in those spaces, do not understand the significance of how bittersweet some of those minor league moments are. Is there one that really sticks out to you where you're like, okay, this led me in my exact direction on how I want to approach coaching when I do kind of turn to that full time?
Nothing really stood out like one specific thing. I do think when you make it to like the professional level, it allows you to see the end in mind, keep the end in mind. So one of my favorite books, and it's right here on my desk, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those chapters, of course, is begin with the end in mind. So when I'm talking to youth athletes, when I'm talking to high school athletes, or even college, it helps you know where the end is. Now, of course, the minor leagues is not the major leagues, but it's still professional. You're at spring training, you're playing professionally. Just there's not that third deck, there's not that, you're just there's a few other things at the major league level, of course, brings about, like, more press stuff and how to, conduct yourself in interviews and playing in front of maybe 50,000 versus, 8,000. But I think knowing that kind of what it looks like and how to get there and what to expect helps when I'm working with younger kids. And, because a lot of them have these aspirations, and you tell them, hey, it's fun, of course, but it's not, it's not all roses, and it's a grind.
I think if I think back of everyone that I've had a conversation with who's had that opportunity and has been blessed with that opportunity, it's like there's so many things that are unseen that no one thinks about unless they've been through those different types of situations. Within that, and being part of not only being able to play professional ball, obviously you being a captain, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. But I'm sure, I don't know if they were the captains back then, Lake County, but okay, so
Yep.
they've been the captains for a minute. So, because that's the same league that that I grew up watching in Cedar Rapids with the Colonels. So that's really cool. But through that, you've had a lot of opportunities, and you said how competitive that your college experience was. within that, is there anything that, from a theme perspective, that really stuck out to you while you were in college?
Now, at college, definitely, there's one thing that really stood out about that college experience in Long Beach State in particular. It was that you don't need fancy to be successful in sports. You don't need fancy to have great player development. And in fact, I was talking to a neighbor here in the Boise area. We were at the community pool and I was there with my kid, and his kids were out there playing in the pool, and I started talking to him, and he actually knew Long Beach. He did rugby in Southern California. He went to Loyola Marymount, LMU, good baseball program, really good baseball program. And he did rugby there, and they would play Long Beach State. And he tells me, he goes, I remember going to Long Beach State, must have been there 15 times. We'd go to the campus there, and we would play right over there on the field. And I said, the field is right next to the baseball practice field, right? And he goes, I was shocked. He goes, how that field looked. He goes, here Long Beach State was this premier program. You'd see him on ESPN at the College World Series. This field was, he goes, that field was worse than my high school field. Like, not the grass and the dirt, but like the amenities. I mean, the field was really well kept, but I mean, the dugouts were just whatever. And there was just some chain link and some high school bleachers. So, but the production was still there, and the player development was still there. And so I think that was the theme that I got, is you don't need fancy to be successful and to really develop players to the highest level.
I can recall one of the things that we really enjoyed talking about when I was on your podcast was the idea of how we connect life and baseball. Within that, there's so many themes that we learned through this beautiful game. And within that, especially from all the different steps that you've been able to take and all the different types of opportunities that you've had, within that, what do you think sticks out most about how you approach your life through the opportunities that you had in baseball?
I think when you are the coach and you're the person that the others look up to, the players look up to, that you really have to hold yourself to a higher standard. You got to model it. So I think being a coach, something that over the years, and I don't know if this answers the questions directly, but I do think it's a good message for coaches. It really forces you to dot your I's, cross your T's, and be a good role model. And that's something I've learned over the years. I think when I first got into coaching, I was coming out of pro ball, and life was more scattered. I was going back to school, doing this, working late nights, as a bouncer. I was just trying to make ends meet when I first got out of pro ball, because you don't make any money in the minor leagues. You lose money. And so you're making ends meet, and I probably wasn't the best example in terms of just kind of that, just really dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and doing the best I could. And over the years as a coach, I've really worked hard on just rounding out my game and being that example, like consistent example across the board, and healthy and positive, and speaking in terms of gratitude, and just being, smiling more, and also being more transformational, more, yeah, they're smiley, love it. Yeah, smiling more. And more than anything, I had a talk with one of my former players recently. I coached him 20 years ago. And I told him, he asked me, he said, how's things going? How's your coaching going? I said, I'm really a lot more transformational, a lot more about connections than mechanics. It's a lot more about connecting with the players than it is working on their swing. Of course, we're going to work on swings and mechanics and pitch and deliver and all that technique and drill. I love drill design. I geek out on the X's and O's, and I think part of that was why I was driven to the X's and O's. But that's something that's really been a big learning point. Is just, it's about the people, and you can do both. They can coexist. You can be transformational, and you can connect with players. It can be personable. And you can be a mentor or leader, and you can transform players' lives, kids' lives in a positive way, and also get them closer to their next baseball goal of playing at the higher levels. They're not mutually exclusive.
The more that I really reflect on it is this community of podcasters is so opening to everyone. And I know that, I mean, I have a very good relationship with you. I have a very, very good relationship with Jimmy. I have a very good relationship with Ken. And within that, Jimmy's not a spring chicken anymore, and that's one of the first things that he'll tell you. And so he's like, I can teach anybody the X's and O's, but those transformational relationships, that's the important piece. And with how I kind of look at that, being a younger guy, and I know we talked about this on our episode as well, was all we are is we have a master's degree in baseball. That's truly all we do. But within that master's degree of baseball brings us into, okay, what is the true meaning of being a master within the game of baseball? It is making those relationships. It is being transformational. No one wants to come and play for a guy where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm bringing in 95 guys. I don't care about you as a person. Like, okay, see you at the end of the semester. If you don't make it, bye. Like, that's doing what you feel like you need to do to keep a job, but that's not doing what you need to really bring you into the light of, hey, Jesus gave me this voice to be able to lead, and I'm not leading in this type of way. And in a way, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm doing what I feel like's best, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that we're missing. And so with that, with youth coaches, there's so much information out there now where it's like, little Johnny brought this to my attention where this Instagram reel has like 15 million views. And you look at it and you're like, well, that's just for views. And so with that being said, there's so much information now that I don't like using the word eyewash, but it's very cookie cutter. And as we know from a movement perspective, and I have good friends in that space as well, nothing's cookie cutter. So within that, what do you feel like is the biggest misconception when you're kind of going through drill design and kind of making drills for youth athletes?
On the topic of eyewash, I think we are driven. I think people are driven, and because of getting more clicks and being kind of, more novel, it's more of a unique kind of, we want to sound unique and different. I think we complicate things specifically, and I'll get into drills here, by going an inch deep and a mile wide. And rather than an inch wide and a mile deep. And so what I mean by that is we have, you'll turn on Instagram or social media and there will be maybe a coach that's got 20 different hitting drills. And I'll tell you what, just have 3 great hitting drills that you dive deep into and then tailor to each kid even better and get a more game-like, vary the competition. I mean, there's so many layers of drill design. I have a drill design guide on my website. When I started writing it, I thought it was just going to be something I could just whip out quickly. It's not. When you start getting into drill design, you're like, I can't have 50 drills. I can't even have, I can't have 10 hitting drills if I really want to be, dive deep into, working. And within each drill, you can get nuanced, you can get detailed, you can have variety. And more important, you can build it around each individual. You can tailor it to each kid. So within drills, something that we complicate is too much talking, not enough reps. Players learn mostly through doing, not hearing and listening. They don't play the game. Very little of the game is through listening. All right. It's not an audiobook. They're out there playing, they're moving. And while I think great coaching messages are definitely worth their weight in gold, they're short, concise messages. John Wooden was very big on short messages. In fact, in one of his books, he said, if I'm not mistaken, he tried to keep every coaching pointer under 20 seconds. 20 seconds, right? I worked with a great coach, and he would go on and on after a game about all the things and it would get up to 20-minute post-game talks. 20-minute post-game talks. And I said, hey, coach, how long, we'd be hanging out afterwards, away from the field. I didn't do it in front of the players. I said, coach, how long do you think you were you were talking there, because I noticed the kids checked out after 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They were thinking, they were looking at, their girlfriends over there or it was like they were out. This is high school. And he said, "Oh, I know, I went a little long, coach. That's probably like what, about 8-10 minutes?" I go, "That was 20 minutes." And so back to drill design. I think too many coaches want to lay out so many pointers before the drill. They want to talk the drill out. They want to have a checklist. You got to just create the environment, get the environment great, but don't have kids going through a huge checklist. Every play lasts seconds, right? They don't have time to go through a checklist. Another one I think we do is complicated is we break down drills into a lot of parts. And baseball is not played in steps. This is very common. I know there's going to be people that listen to me and go, I like breaking it down. Some players, you do need to break it down. But when you break things down, inherently, it's going to thus become a little more robotic, right? You're like this, fielding a ground ball has 7 steps. I'll tell you what, when I watch a professional or even a 7-year-old field a ground ball, there's no time to think through more than 2 steps. And it happens so fluidly that you don't even, 7 steps, it just gets robotic. Like, do this and stop, do this and stop, do this and stop. And so, it's a fluid motion. Fielding a ground ball is your ready position, or your, kind of your timing. A lot of people teach the hop. Okay. Then you got to the movement. You got to get your feet going, and then you got to get in front of it. You got to get, or however you're going to field it, you're going to have to get ready to field it with your base. Then you got to field it, right? Say a ground ball. Then you got to transfer. Then you got to throw. So I think, and it happens it needs to be smooth and fluid. And I think when we break things into too many parts, it takes the fluidity and athleticism out of our players. I'm not saying there's not a time and place. I just see coaches that do this a lot with their drills, or every drill they want to break it down. And another thing is, not all kids are on the same step. So you have a kid that might be on step 1, the other kid's on step 7, he's bored. But I'll tell you what, when you set up a ground ball drill and you hit ground balls, that kid's going to field it at his level, and that kid's going to field it as his level. And also, you can hit the ball a little softer or slower to the kids that aren't as good, and you can challenge the kids with your fungo, or if you're just rolling it or whatever, you can challenge them in the environment. So you can adapt the environment a little bit better than, say, it's really hard to run a 6-step ground ball station drill. Say, hey, you take step 1, coach. Who has 6 coaches out there? And you take step 2. And also, how do you know where everyone's at? So I think we should break the parts down into fewer steps, make it more fluid, or just not really get into that process too much, and just create great drills, create game-like environments. And that's the first thing I look at when I look at a drill. And I'll finish right there. We could dive into this. This could be a whole podcast, really, because drill design is something that I think is just so undervalued and underappreciated, and just so much is being left on the table. And the biggest thing is, with drill design, I'll leave it at this. You want to maximize the quality game-like reps. You want to minimize the coaching pointers. And if anything, you pull kids, coaching pointers, if anything, should be individualized. Because every coaching pointer you tell the whole team, those kids are internalizing, they're digesting, and you're filling up you're taking their bandwidth. Well, half the kids may not need to know that. Also, one last thing, you go, well, coach, you don't coach up your kids with coaching pointers. I do. What I'll do is start every drill with the 80-20 principle in mind. In other words, I take the one, there's a book called The One Thing. Like, if you do this one thing, it'll take care of kind of everything else. It's like the first domino. I think there are 1 or 2 things that your team, if you said, hey, we're going to work on, I don't want to see the ball go under anybody's glove today on the ground balls, right? Because you're noticing they're working high to low versus low to high on ground balls. Or whatever, or that's the most common problem. And you say, I don't want to see anything go under gloves, because in the last game, there was 4 ground balls that went under gloves. And that was by far the most common mistake that your team made. So coach up the most common mistake, coach to fix the most common mistake team-wide. And then from there, individualize your coaching pointers. So you don't, crush the bandwidth of the kids that really don't need that, and just really focus on creating a better environment rather than a great coaching mess. Like, I think so many coaches try to learn how to teach the fielding a ground ball or the hitting swing or catching a fly ball or a throw. They spend so much time trying to figure out how to explain it, when I think they should spend more time trying to create an environment that allows the kid that leverages the game. The kid can then leverage the game to learn. And that's a big thing right there. Most coaches think they need to teach everything to the players or most of the game to the players with what they're saying or demonstrating. But the game, leveraging the game of baseball, a quality drill training environment, is the greatest way to leverage and scale great teaching. Create the environment and let the game do the bulk of the teaching. First off, it gives autonomy. We want to give autonomy to our players. We want our kids to learn on their own. And then we sit there and we guide them through and we talk them through everything. Create a game-like, quality game-like training environment with a certain amount of difficulty. Sometimes it needs to be a little easier to build confidence, maybe to rep up or kind of like on-ramp a drill, but there needs to be some challenge. There needs to be some competition. There needs to be some fun element to it. There needs to be all these elements. That takes a lot of effort just to create that. So let the game, leverage the game of baseball, leverage great drills to be the teacher rather than feeling like you got to sit in front of the class and explain it perfectly.
That's what I really enjoy, I think, about what we're doing at Minnesota Renegade is, especially on the pitching side of things, we now know that one of the best implements for my pitching side of things is the water bag. Now, the beauty of the water bag is a lot of people just put it around their shoulders and think that's their movement profile. That's incorrect. So the first drill that we do is we have them hold their water bag in 6 different ways. And whenever they rotate and the water is the loudest, it's giving that audio feedback of, hey, this is how I need to rotate. I'm not saying anything, they hear it. And so it's the same thing within that is, I won't go into too much of a tangent, but especially at the college level, I can break it down into 2 different pieces. I can break it down into, are you an aerial mover or are you a terrestrial mover? And then within that, there's a lot of buckets. But I'm not saying, hey, you're this type of mover. You're going to show me that you're this type of mover. So I'm not going to use my words. I'm going to say, okay, how did that feel? How are we going about this in a way to have you have success? This is how I did it, but you don't move like that. So as most people know, I wasn't 100% blessed with the most boost in my system. I kind of got to end in my career like 5'8", 5'9", 5'9.5" with cleats. I'll always say that, probably still incorrect. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not able to teach a guy who moves 6'3" and is a terrestrial mover the same way that I would teach myself who's 5'8" and is an aerial mover. But we're not saying anything. We're letting their movement profile dictate that. And I think that's the beautiful piece of not only how you described it, but at the same time, it's one of those things where we're letting our athletes fail without us saying, okay, this is how you need to do that. And it's that self-organization of, hey, when we do it in this certain way, this is how this feels, and this is how this connects. And within that, there's both of us are kind of in that private sector, but we're doing it from a different lens. A lot of people do it from, okay, yeah, I want to win championships. Championships happen when the groundwork is correct. And I think that's not only what we do incredibly well at Minnesota Renegade, but at the same time, you're a part of an organization called the Boise Bolts. Do you kind of want to go into a little bit more detail on kind of what that mission is and kind of how you went about that to make that type of organization?
Well, you know what? The Boise Bolts, it was interesting. I was sitting there picking up my kid from school, and a guy had a hat on. His name's Dustin. I actually just saw him just a couple days ago at the Boise's got a professional soccer team now in the USL, the AC Boise team, and we were at the game, and I saw him. His name's Dustin. He's actually the COO of that. He's a sports guy, and he's got kids, and he said, hey, we're starting this branch of Little League that's more competitive. So instead of full scale, it's kind of a hybrid. It's instead of a full scale travel outfit, it's going to be a more affordable and a, scaled down, but more competitive version of Little League. And there's some caveats. Hey, you got to play Little League to be able to be on this. So it was trying to boost the Little League environment and try to make the quality of the local game. He was basically trying to make the competition better locally. So you didn't have to travel across the state or to other states and pay a fortune. So I got involved with that. He saw my, we were talking, he had the Bolts, and he said, hey, 80-20 baseball, and he liked the podcast, and quite a few of the coaches were already listening to it. So they brought me on to help out with the coaching development. So I kind of just mentor and guide them. It's a great group. A lot of it is kind of why I designed 80/20 baseballs. You don't need me to show up to everything. You can leverage the podcast. You can leverage the website, all the videos. You can leverage the content I put out on social media. And so like I ran into one of the better coaches recently that is part of that organization at a soccer, the AC Boise game from like a month ago. And he had a great year. They had a great year. His team had a great year. And he said, he goes, man, he's learning from the videos I'm putting out on social, just the short little clips of teaching the game. So the nice thing is that's why I started 80. My dad used to, this was in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. My dad was on the Little League board. Part of that was because he saw the corruption that was going on in the local Little League. And there was money skimming. There was some stuff going on. There was just some shady stuff. So my dad got involved because he didn't want that to be a part of the league while my brother and I were there. But the other thing that he did is he wanted to elevate the coaching. So he would bring in the local coaches. He would bring in pro coaches, pro athlete, former major leaguer, things like that, but also like really good high school coaches, which we were blessed to have a lot in the area. He'd bring them in, and it was hard for. I talked to him. I said, "Dad, how did that work?" He goes, "Well, that wasn't cheap because we were paying him like $300. This was in the early 90s to come for 3 hours or whatever, and also we would only get like 25% of the coaches because to show up. The turnout wasn't great because it was just hard to put it at the right time. We put it on a Saturday mornings. People would be out of town. There was others, it would be in the preseason. They might be playing basketball or other sports. And I thought, it kind of got me thinking, wait, we have this was years ago. And I said, wait, why don't I just build out 80/20 baseball? And this is one big online direct access coaching clinic that coaches could access from wherever, whenever, at their pace, around their schedule, rather than having to go down to the field. And speaking of Bolts, one thing we've gone back and forth with the Boise Bolts organization is like having clinics. And one thing I keep bringing up with them is like, hey, the best you're going to get, even if you have a really good message and a really good topic, and you even put it at the optimal time to host it, and you keep it local at the local field, you're lucky to get a third of the coaches to show up because their schedules, right? I mean, who's going to carve out that? Because they can't play with their kid during the thing, and it's just like, I go, why not take that now? Why with video and audio and things like that with video now? I think the coaching clinic in person, I think that's something that the Boise Bolts have really bought into. Now it's just like I went and filmed myself putting in a dynamic warm-up, a full-scale throwing routine, and even a strength and conditioning, on-field strength and conditioning routine with one of the teams. And then guess what? I send those videos to all the coaches. So none of them had to be there except the coach with one team. But now all the teams, and also, even better, I edit it. So instead of a 1 hour, I was out there for 2 hours. The total length of the 3 videos combined was about 30 minutes. Because you just cut out all the, fluff. And so in 30 minutes, they're getting what was 2 hours plus. They're watching it when their kids go to bed at 9:00 on a Wednesday, and they see it all. So that's kind of with the Bolts, what I've kind of been leveraging, and it's really worked well. But also something to keep in mind for people around the country, around the world, is you can do these hybrid models. Look to maybe do a hybrid model where you have some competitive components, but it's not maybe full scale, all weekend, every weekend, year round baseball.
I know being within kind of that college coaching realm now, there's so much that everyone's like, oh yeah, my son's been playing only baseball since he's been like 9. And I go, well, and it's kind of a double-edged sword because that's kind of what I did as well. At least from a sports perspective, other than I was blessed. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt taekwondo, so I had baseball and I had that. So kind of from the discipline piece of on the mound, I guess that's kind of what made me so calm, but at the same time, so like competitive. And so I wouldn't change those moments at all. And when we're kind of putting our kids in to those buckets at the age of 9, 10, like he's only a baseball player, and we're putting all his identity in that, like, let the man go break something. Let him go jump a fence. I mean, I know it's a little bit more old school now because they have these terrible things. Well, they're awesome, but they're also terrible. and they kind of gravitate towards that side. And there's a lot of life lessons that even my generation, we didn't really understand. But now that there's a lot of older coaches, like they're still taking that type of lens because it's like, that's how we failed. We failed through those opportunities. We didn't have someone to pat us on the back and go, good job. Like we figured it out on our own, and we learned tough skin. So now kind of making that transition to where coaching is now, it's so hard to still make those types of relationships, but be very, very like intense where you're wanting the best for your athletes at the same time. And with that being said, it's not only that from on the baseball field, but also in the classroom. And I know we've had a lot of conversations where the beauty of it is you are not only impacting people through the game of baseball, you're impacting young lives through all these different types of lenses, through all these different types of conversations, through, hey, this might stick with this athlete or this might stick with this normal student. Within that, what are some of the main principles that you use as a baseball coach that you use in the classroom for your non-athletes?
I'll tell you what, that's something, being a teacher, has just expedited my growth as a coach. And I taught my first class. It was special ed, high needs special ed PE class back in, this was probably 2002. And I'll tell you what, if you can do a special ed's very high needs PE class, when you roll out there with a bunch of 12-year-olds that have been playing baseball and physically abled, it makes it real easy. A lot easier, I should say. And then I think the other thing is, as a coach, we are teachers. So it's just been a blessing to be outside of the baseball world and learn from teachers. So many coaches that I hear have really good messages about coaching. Or one thing that I think that's helped me out a lot is I've been able to step away from having my own team since I started 80/20. So I've been able to work from that 30,000 foot view rather than kind of, they say you can't work on the business when you're working in the business. And so if you're in the trenches with your own team, you're really worried about that team. And I've been able to look at baseball from a much higher level. And along with that, teaching gives me another perspective. I taught 12 years, inner city, LA. So my classes, I taught North Long Beach, Jordan High School. Anybody knows LA Jordan High School? Not LA Jordan, but Long Beach Jordan, which interestingly are very close to each other and very similar. Long Beach Jordan. In fact, I got my second teaching job. They had budget cuts back in the late, it was 2010. They had budget cuts at California, big budget cuts. So I got teacher of the year. 2010, I got laid off. 2010. I got teacher of the year the same week I got laid off because it was last in, first out. You know how it goes, the pecking order in public education. It wasn't about how good you were. It was just your seniority. It wasn't what's best for the kids. So I went from there I got lucky and very fortunate. I was blessed to get a job down the street in Paramount Unified. So Long Beach, Paramount touches Compton. Long Beach, where I was, it touches Compton and Watts. Paramount, like it's Compton, Watts, Paramount, North Long Beach. People think of Long Beach as like the beach. And Long Beach is huge. It's like 500,000 people. It's a big city. It's massive, and it's got lots of different neighborhoods. You got Naples, that's like, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, I don't know, maybe $10 million homes. And then you got the projects in North Long Beach. And that's where I was working. And I got the job down the street. They said, hey, how can you teach these kids? How can you relate to the kids at our school? So I went we have 125 people that want this job. They had the stack of resumes. And I said, I taught at Jordan. I taught at Long Beach Jordan, and I had a lot of success. I was teacher there. They said, if you could teach at Jordan, you could teach anywhere. And so if you could teach at Jordan, you can coach any kid. I would run PE classes with 50 to 55 students. Some of my classes were 55. That was a district cap. 55. None of them looked like me. They were gang members. Now they're 15 years old, 14, but these kids were already, it was a rough neighborhood. None of these kids lived in like real homes. They were all, half my roster was Compton, Watts kids. And I was able, in an area that I did not look like the kids, had to work extra hard. I had so many barriers to entry. I was able, by my third year, with great mentors, including my mom, who was a teacher, for probably the best teacher I ever saw over the years, with just classroom management, connecting and really getting the most out of her kids. And I was able to, by my third year, I could sit there and blow a whistle from the locker room door and get 55 of these kids, Watts, Compton kids, I mean, to get up and run through a 14, 12-minute, 14, 15-minute dynamic warm-up, 55 of them on their own, without me saying another word or blowing the whistle a second time. And you go, well, so it showed me what was possible. And also it taught me something. Here's a valuable lesson. When I run warm-ups with kids out there in a baseball field, I install the warm-up, and then I let them run it. All I tell, I'll usually just typically say go, and that's it. And for the next 12 minutes, 14 minutes, all the way through the throwing routine, I don't have to say a word about the structure or the routine or the process. I can coach the kids. I can coach some technique. I can connect, ask them about, hey, how was that? How was that hike? How was that camping trip? How was that surfing? How was whatever, right? So it taught me a very valuable lesson that kids want autonomy, and by automating it, kind of getting the kids to do it, it was wonderful. But I think overall teaching, one thing that's taught me about teaching, one of the biggest messages is putting kids on blast. When you put kids on blast in front of their teammates, and I could teach, I have a list. I just put down a list yesterday for a new teacher. I've been mentoring teachers, new teachers, and it's a list of like classroom management or how to connect with. It was like a list of 15 things, and I just put it together yesterday. I mean, the list is there. I just kind of trying to put it into something, maybe turn it into a book or at least an article or something I can share with that. But it really is all about connecting with kids. And one of the biggest things is putting them on blast. So as coaches, when we're putting a kid on blast for their mistake, this is something I learned really, really quick and early, because in the hood, all you have is saving face in the hood. When you're in the hood, all that matters is how you look and saving face, right? Like if you get challenged in the hood, you can't back down, because that will ruin you for life, like there in the hood. Now, if you're in Irvine, California, or in some Coral Gable, like if you're in a nice area, Beverly Hills, you can do that and nobody's going to remember it. Like, you can walk away. But in the hood, if you get called out. So here's a quick story. I was my first year teaching at Long Beach, Jordan. Back in 2007, I had a class. This was this maxed out 55, and it was a rainy day. We didn't get a lot of rainy days in Southern California, but we had a rainy day, and I had to take the PE class inside. So I found an empty classroom. A teacher had an off period. I borrowed their classroom. I had 55 kids in the classroom, in this small classroom. Ashabraner Jones. She had just been voted the ASB class president. Here she is over in the back corner, right? She's on her phone. And I said out loud from across the room, Ashabraner, put the phone away. And she looked at me and says, in not the most kind language, she says, F you, Mr. Ashabraner, F you, in front of 55 kids. And later on, I talked to one of my mentors, Lamar. He's 60-year-old, grew up in the inner city, grew up next to Nickerson, went to school next to Nickerson Gardens, like in like the projects. He went to Verbum Day, and I talked to him frequently and had him on the podcast. He's an athletic. He just finished up as an athletic director. Great mentor of mine. And he said, you made the cardinal sin you made the big mistake, number one, the biggest mistake. And I said, what's that? He's like, don't call these kids out in front of their peers. He goes, in fact, don't even call them out when they think their peers might even be able to like hear it from a distance. He goes, you will lose them, and they will go to war against you, and you'll never. He goes, if you're going to correct them, do it quietly, correct quietly, praise loudly. And so I learned that. The hard way. Thankfully, Alan Miles, the dean of students, had come to my class twice that year. He came to my class twice for whatever reasons. Well, this time he came to my class 30 seconds, might have been like 15 seconds after this, right as this just happened. So I had the dean come in. He's a big, strong looking guy, and the kids related to him because he was black, and most of my kids were either black or Hispanic. And he comes in, I said, hey, Mr. Miles, can you can you get, it saved me because this was not something I was going to win. And he's like, yeah, I'll talk to her. He took Sandra Leia out and they talked. And then, and later I said, how'd it go? And then he taught me, he goes, hey, she's got some challenges going on at home. He basically personalized her rather than, he goes, hey, don't look at the behavior, look at the person. He goes, she's acting out. She's doing these things because she's lacking at home. Her dad's not around so that taught me another valuable lesson is like, he goes, you can't take that stuff personally. He goes, don't take it personally when kids misbehave, players misbehave. Check the ego because kids are going to misbehave. It's not about you. Don't be narcissistic and think the kids are acting out just to get at you. They're not. There's typically something else in their life that's lacking, or they've been hurt and now they're looking to hurt or cause problems elsewhere. So I learned 2 really big messages from teaching that made me a heck of a lot better coach.
Those stories remind me of who's the actor from Friends who's in that one movie where he goes in and is supposedly the substitute, but then gets taken and he's the only one who looks a certain way and he's trying to get buy-in and he leaves the first day and they're like, yes, we got rid of him. And then he does that chocolate milk thing and then everyone's on board with him. And then he just really relates to the student where they probably were never met halfway. And I think that's a story that not only has been shared on the big screen, but then I look at it from the lens of baseball as well. Like, in a way, with how you describe what you've been through, that's kind of the premise of Hardball as well, which is one of the greatest baseball movies of all time.
100%.
Obviously, as always, rest in peace to G Baby, but there's just a lot of things that a lot of people don't understand what we're going through until we're in their shoes. And a lot of people don't understand what another person's going through until we walk a mile in those shoes. And I know that's a little bit of an older saying, but I think that's something that always stands true. And so I think within that, the 80-20 principle, you preach it like no tomorrow. And one way that I look at this, and I'm sure this is a lot different than you, but I always feel like when I describe it, I say, hey, I'm going to give you the 80, you need to figure out the 20. When they graduate from me, I flip that. I said, I'm going to give you the 20 and it's going to feel like the 80. But you're actually going to learn the 80 because I can only give you so much. The truth is how you learn it and how you interpret it. And that's the true 80%. So I don't know if you've kind of ever thought about it in that lens, but from when you started the podcast to now, has that kind of changed your thought process with the true meaning of the 80-20? Or is it one of those things where it's been the same principle throughout and it's just kind of been slightly manipulated?
That's interesting you say that. I have seen that kind of 80-20 ratio show up other places. And again, the 80-20 ratio is not supposed to be exact, right? And I got the book right here. And, it's not supposed to be an exact number. It could be 5-95. It could be 7. It could be 30-70, 70-30. It could be 60-40. But I have seen it play out in other places, like your example of what you said. And so I definitely like, it's kind of a leveraging thing. It's leveraging. So, hey, I'm going to teach you the 20. You got to figure out the 80, or I'm going to teach you the 80. You got to figure out the 20. And with the 80-20 principle, that was a big reason on like my message about drill design was, hey, you got to, first off, you got to allocate practice time according to, that was kind of a big epiphany with the 80-20 principle was you got to allocate practice time according to the impact it's going to have come game time and also in that kid's lifetime. And not all inputs have equal outputs. In other words, our actions don't always have equal impact in terms of their results. And so that was a big thing for me where I noticed that with, say, having a bunch going out there and like coach. Okay, backing up here. I coached with a great coach. He had 6 bunt defenses, and we would spend probably 10 to 15% of our practice time on bunt defenses, right? And if you looked at a typical game, bunt defenses probably saved or cost us If I caught, ended up, first off, we had too many bunt defenses, too much, and that we actually were terrible at them. Instead of just having 2 or 3 we were great at. But we would spend so much time there, and it would cut into our hitting time. It would cut into our bullpen time. It would cut into our ground ball time. Well, I'll tell you what, ground balls, hitting, pitching, being able to command and throw strikes, and I mean, accuracy, like a throwing, we would speed through the throwing routine just to get to the bunt defense drill. The bunt defenses barely save you much. I mean, they'll save you maybe a little bit here and there. I'm not saying not to have a bunt defense. What I'm saying is, do not allocate 30 minutes to bunt defense and 30 minutes to ground balls. You're going to use the bunt defense twice in the next game, and your team is going to field 20 ground balls. There's not you know what I mean? And you're going to save in other words, you're going to save and reduce the opportunity for the other team to score runs at a much higher clip by getting better at ground balls than by getting better at the bunt defense. That doesn't mean you do not focus on that bunt defense. You just make sure you allocate your practice and training time according to how much it's going to impact the results in the game, or when it comes to connecting with kids and building up better people, how much it's going to impact them throughout the rest of their life. So I think that, but like you said, you could look at that kind of interesting, 80-20 is, I see it other places that's interesting. I love how you leveraged it. And I think kids like numbers. They like that. They kind of like math. It paints a different picture of how to see the world. And I think that's, and I do want to go back one thing while I remember, you talked about Hardball. One of the two of the movies that I really like, and this ties into the last point, is Remember the Titans. And there's a scene in Remember the Titans where the two coaches, I don't remember the actor's name. There's Denzel Washington and then the other coach. And the other coach has a playbook that's this thick, a big binder. He's got 100 plays or whatever. And Denzel Washington has just like 8 plays. I think he says 8 plays. I got 8 plays. And the other coach just looks at Denzel Washington like, what do you mean 8 plays? Like, what in the world do you mean 8 plays? How are you going to win with just 8 plays? Well, you got to have more plays. You got to have more is better. And he said, you know what? All I need is 8 plays. We're going to run into perfection. And that's true. And you go, well, is that true in real life? The number 1 ranked high school football program in United States history by pretty much every publication is De La Salle out of Concord, California. I watched De La Salle play in person, and the first time 2 teams played, this was at Long Beach City College, number 1 versus number 2 was Long Beach Poly, who had, at the time, on their roster, like 30 Division I players. So, of course, some were sophomores that weren't playing yet, but they would become stars. And De La Salle had Maurice Jones-Drew, but they didn't have really anybody else. It was like maybe they might have had like 5 D1 players. And it was number 1 versus number 2, the first time in USA Today history these two had met. I was at the game, sat 50-yard line. There wasn't a lot of people there, believe it or not. I thought there would be more. It was kind of a rainy night, or kind of weather was a little off. But I watched Remember the Titans happen in front of me. De La Salle ran they ran a split veer. It's fascinating offense. Kind of an option, veer, a lot of die, just a lot of that midline stuff. A lot of football coaches know what I'm talking about. Like it's cool stuff. But it was basically just, they would run it to perfection, and they were just boom, boom. And their thing was, they just got off the ball so much faster. So these guys that were 5'10" at guard and 190 were beating these big dudes who were more athletic that were 6'4", 240, 260 defensive tackles. They were beating them because they were just firing off the ball. And later on, I'd learned that, they rep the heck out of that. They don't take and learn 80 plays. They take 80 reps at firing off the ball. So they're 5 plays, they're 10. They didn't have 8 plays. They had more than that. But if you watched it from if you looked at De La Salle, the number 1 rated by every publication, the history of the United States, the number 1 rated high school football program. It's not Texas. Of course, Texas has a bunch up there. Ohio, there's Miami, Florida, Miami there's others, definitely. But this was number 1. and they ran the most vanilla offense. And it was about being vanilla, but making that vanilla the best vanilla in the whole world. And they just would just smoke them off the ball, and it didn't matter what the play call was, because they would just get off the ball, set the gap, and the guy would be through the seam and gone. And it was like, yeah, we don't need to be cute, right? And that's kind of, so that was something. And the other movie I really like, Coach Carter, very underrated, very undervalued. Coach Carter. If you haven't watched Coach Carter, that is a fantastic movie. And I'm drawing a blank on names. Who's the actor in there? Fishburne? No, anyways, great actor, famous actor. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but Coach Carter, there's so many great coaching movies out there. Hoosiers. You want to give pregame speeches, watch Hoosiers. You can just steal from all these great movies, like the great parts, but the Coach Carter, what really stood out was the tough love, right? A lot of coaches are all tough with no love, and a lot of coaches are all love and just want to be friends. And that's a big thing. If you try to be friends with kids, you're going to lose them. They don't respect that. So it was like how to be tough and how to have both tough and love. Well, you can be firm with your rules, have very few rules, be firm with them, be consistent with them, make sure every player goes up to those standards. I know a lot of coaches now like the word standards or whatever, but have expectations that are high expectations for players, and then high support and high love, high expectations and high love. And that was Coach Carter. Man, his expectations were through the roof. True story too. I think it was in the Bay Area, California, basketball coach. And it was like those two movies really stood out where, he focused on a couple key things with team culture. And then remember the Titans, it was like the X's and O's. Let's just have a few, and this should be really good at them.
The one and only Samuel Jackson is the man that you're thinking of for Coach.
And Samuel L. Jackson.
Within that, the funny thing is, the first time that I saw that movie, I was actually a little bit older. And I remember I watched it on TV with my family, and we were all in the front room, and I look at her and I go, "Hey, Mom, that's Mace Windu." And she goes, because I'm a big Star Wars guy. So I would always connect everything to Star Wars. So if like there was an actor and I was able to do that, like anytime that I would see Luke Skywalker and I'd see Mark Hamill, I'd be like, okay, like that's who that is. And then things like that. So it's just funny how things connect. And within that, you can see that all those coaches that we've described through those movies and why they're so impactful is not because of what they teach us on the field or through those different types of opportunities. It's how do they relate that to life? And within that, there are a lot of different things that, unless we kind of see it from that lens, kind of go unnoticed with those movies. Because it's like, oh, okay, we see it as a sports movie. No, it's an inspirational movie. Like, that's the same thing with the Field of Dreams. Everyone's like, oh, it's just about baseball. No, nowhere close. Especially being from Iowa, very, very sacred movie for us. So when they just say it's a baseball movie, no, that's a top 5 movie ever. And it shouldn't only be because it's a baseball movie. There's so many different levels to it, and how it's able to impact all these different people, and how you're able to see it and interpret it. Like, that's what coaching is. And so there's a lot of coaches that teach the game incredibly well. The thing that kind of falls through at times is, are they teaching or are they coaching? And within that, when did you realize that, and I'm sure being a teacher helped this, but when did you realize teaching the game was so much more important and impactful in your players' lives than coaching the game?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do want to go, that last question, maybe I didn't even answer the original question on the previous question. I just was thinking, you brought up, we're talking movies, and I just had those 2 movies I had to bring up. And so I probably didn't even get to your last answering. I apologize for that. But I do think that, it was worthwhile to dive into that. But now with this question, with the teaching and the coaching, I try not to separate them too much. I try to kind of keep them together. I think if you're going to be a great coach, you have to be a great teacher, and coaching is teaching and teaching is coaching. And more specifically, I think life lessons and I really think it's important for the listeners to hear this, how I distinguish this, that it commonly is spoken of like, you can either coach baseball or you can teach them about life. Like they're mutually exclusive, like they can't go hand in hand. And I think sometimes we also think that we need to do kumbaya and pure team culture or pure people building drill or practices or whatever, or activities to build up the person, the human. And then we have to take away from, fielding ground balls. Well, life is like the physical part of sports is so much like life. You get up, you rep, you grind, you rep, you do the boring stuff. I watched Troy Tulowitzki in college when he was just coming into Long Beach State, and we were sitting there, had a funny conversation. Bobby Crosby was a shortstop the year before, 2 years before. Apologize. Bobby Crosby, Rookie of the Year, American League Rookie of the Year, 2002, I believe. Bobby was a shortstop in Long Beach my first 2 years there. And then Troy came in my senior year, and he was a starting shortstop as a freshman. And we sat there and watched him field ground ball after ground ball after ground ball, just hundreds of ground balls before every practice, after every practice. By the way, the coach at the time was Coach Hyde. Coach Hyde would hit him a lot of ground balls. Coach Hyde was the Orioles manager. I mean, Coach Brandon Hyde was wasn't even a paid coach at Long Beach State. And he was the manager. He was the manager of the Baltimore Orioles, right? So that's how stacked, the coaches were, and how blessed I was to have so many great baseball people around. But nonetheless, he just hit ground balls. He did 100 and wouldn't say a word to Troy. And Troy just fielded him. And it goes back to I see Little League practices where the coach can't go 3 ground balls without giving out a pointer or talking. And he would just, here's a coach who literally was going to be a manager in the future at the major league level. And he would sit there and just hit ground balls, and Troy would miss one. He didn't miss a lot, but he'd miss one. Coach Hyde wouldn't say a word to him. He just hit another one. He knew the game, and the player had ownership and would eventually get there. Now, I think if a player makes the same mistake on the third time, I like the idea of 3. 3's a charm. That's when you intervene. If they haven't figured out, they make one mistake, cool, let them figure it out. Second one, maybe they're still working through it. Third one, it's probably a good chance that they need some guidance. Nevertheless, so Tulowitzki would just field these ground ball after ground ball after ground ball and just go through the grind. It was the grind, and back to kind of like teaching life skills. The grind of sports, getting up for 6 a.m. weights every, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, getting up and just grinding. Delayed gratification, which is already inherently built into sports. You practice. You get 2 hours under the lights on Friday night. If you're for football, you get a couple games a week. You practice. I know nowadays travel ball, everybody's playing games, which I don't like. I like games. I actually prefer more expeditiously run like scrimmages, but nevertheless, games aren't the big problem, but I think generally speaking, we in sports, it's a lot of training, a lot of practice, especially like Olympic level and pro level athletes. You get to that level, it's a lot of practice, and it's 5%, maybe not even 5% game time. I would say it's probably let's say 5%. But if you actually took the time, they're actually on the field doing the reps during the game, and then compared that ratio to practice, grinding, you're maybe 5%, 2%. So that's life. You got to grind. You're not always going to get recognition. You're not always going to, not every day is vacation in Hawaii and cruise ships and, parties and birthday parties, that's how life is. You get one birthday a year, the other 364 days. Sorry, kid. It's not about you. You got to grind and enjoy the boringness a little bit and find fun in the boring. So I think kind of back to my overall point here is I don't think we need to separate. If you run practices right and you run just kind of the drill design and practice design inherently and keep kids coming back and playing youth sports, they're inherently going to build skills that are going to get them ready for life. The teammates, just it's built in. If you create a culture without talking about it too much, but create a good culture of being good teammates, right? There's something that, I think I could have been a better teammate over the years. That's something I wish that coaches would have worked on a little bit more, because I had it from my parents and I had it from outside, growing up and church and things like that, being a good person. But I think I wish it was a little bit more of that emphasis put on for me as a player. I've learned the hard way over the years, and I've gotten a lot better at it. But I think if you build a good team culture, they're going to see firsthand what it looks like to be a good teammate, which means they're going to be better coworkers, better, better spouses, better, family as they get older. They're going to work with people better. I know companies that literally hire athletes ahead of anybody because they could teach them the skill, but it's hard to rewire who they are as a person and how they treat other people, how they take advice, how they take constructive criticism. Like that gets wired in young. You could teach them how to code and how to use Claude and how to use Replit, but you could teach them how to do all that much faster than you can rewire their ability to take constructive criticism, to pick up a teammate, to make sure it's not all about them, it's about the team. So I think inherently, it's built in if we run practices right. So I think that's two things. I like to, as you know, Coach Vonderchek, I try to give a different look at it, not to be different. I don't like contrarians. I have some of those in my life. I love them, but they're contrarian. You can say, hey, it's 72 degrees. The app on your phone says 72 degrees and sunny, and they'll say, no, there's a cloud way over there. Like where? Over there, over Oregon? They'll just do that. And I go, I don't like to be contrarian just for contrarian's sake. I think it's important to kind of spin this a little and look at it from a different lens for your listeners, so they can, not that I'm smarter, I just look at it like, oh, I've had all these mentors and there was something I wanted to share. Speaking of that, you said walk in somebody else's shoes. I want to give a different take. Speaking of different takes on this, I like to use the kind of thought, instead of thinking of like, hey, you got to walk a mile in their shoes. I think that makes us think about their location, their environment. They grew up they lived in the projects. They had a 1-bedroom house with 8 people. They had, or their clothes are raggedy or whatever. Of course, my grandma used to say geheinisch. It's a great old word, geheinisch. But anyways, you kind of look at their lot in life in terms of what's around them versus what's in their head, in their mind. I think instead of walking a mile in somebody's shoes, we should live a day in their head. We should live a day in their mind. We should live a day we should live and try to feel their emotions that they are feeling. And better yet, try to quickly live. You can't go back, but try to listen to their story, hear their story, and then go, oh, this is probably where their mind is, their thoughts are coming from. So it's not so much about where they're standing in life, but it's where their mind is at, the mindset. We talk about mindset. So I think we should maybe shift from like, it's definitely not a wrong way to say walking. We all get, but I think if we want to be even more specific and really take this and really make it click as we're teaching it to younger coaches or teachers about, hey, walk a mile in their shoes or live a day in their, let's live a day in their mind. Because we start to realize there's worries, there's fears. Maybe they got abused. Maybe they got this. Maybe they have been let down by adults. And that all manifests up here. You're not going to see it in their Chuck Taylors. You're going to see it you're not even going to see it. It's all internal. So we have to take, and that's what I think's made me such a successful teacher is I had all these great mentors and I had great parents and I had a lot of love growing up. So I don't take things, I had a lot of love. And so I'm able to give that back. And so one way to share that love with kids, teachers, and coach and players is I can go, oh man, dang, like he's acting a fool. That kid's acting up at practice. They're out of line. But then I go, right away, almost immediately I can go, where did they get let down? Who let them down? What adult? Where did they get screwed over? And I can trace almost all of it back, like to abuse, maybe like some of my kids that I work with that have bigger issues, might be a lot of that, or they got let down. They had no dad in their life. Or their home was, just no love. There was no love. There was no, church. There's no God. There was no, whatever it is. And you could kind of reverse engineer their life and then put yourself in their mind, their current mindset. Where is their mindset? Because it's not my mindset. It's not your mindset. Their mindset is so unique, right? We actually look a lot more similar to everybody else than our mindsets probably are aligned with everybody else because of their background. So kind of back to that, looking at it differently. And I think that's something I would definitely share is like, hey, when we're looking at a kid, try to put yourself in their mindset. What has led them, not their behavior. The behavior is separate the behavior from the kid. But Coach Bo, you are what you do. I get it. And when you're 25 years old and you're still acting a fool, I'm going to hold you more accountable. At least I'm going to feel like, hey, you need to step up a little more. You're 30 years old. You need to be more accountable at 30, right? But at 15, I'm sorry. I've worked with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of kids from 6, a lot of them in that 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 range. And I'll tell you what, no, don't blame the kids. Don't blame the kids. Don't blame those kids. Blame the adults that let them down. Blame their environment that was suboptimal. Blame somebody who was bad to them. Blame previous coaches that were so hard on that kid and rude and disrespectful and made fun of them in front of their teammates. Blame that adult who should have known better. Don't blame the kid. So separate the behavior from the kid. Until you do that, you cannot connect with kids genuinely and you cannot empathize with kids. If you look at the behavior and you think, and you see the behavior as a kid as one entity, one thing, as just together, you will never be able to. It is very hard to empathize because you're going to be like, they're driving me crazy. Oh, and you're going to be like irritated. You're going to be like tense. You're like, that kid is acting a fool, man. You want to yell at him. But the way you can work around that is to say, okay, that's the output. What got them there? They're 14 years old. They're 11 years old. I'm telling you, they didn't just wake up and go, I'm going to be a bad kid. They're not. No, when they're 30 and they're still doing that, that's a whole different story because they've had time to look back and, work on their traumas and abuse or whatever and be able to work through it and be able to solve some of those things. But at 12 years old, 9 years old, I'm sorry. You know what? I had a teacher the other day say, I had a teacher who runs a pretty big organization. I got out of teaching, runs here in Boise, pretty high up. And he said he used to teach and his sister's a teacher for years. And he goes, yeah, she was complaining. He goes, oh man, I had so many bad classes. And I said, you know what? I don't agree with that. I said, if you're teaching, like you have bad team, like as in a work, as adults, yeah, that's one thing. But when you're teaching ninth graders, there's no such thing as a bad class. Only, I wouldn't say bad teachers. I would say teachers that are poorly skilled and or underprepared or have the wrong mindset. So you go, I know this is crazy and we want to blame everybody, but it goes back to Jocko Willink's book. Jocko Willink, speaking of taking stuff from outside of baseball, the one biggest thing about Jocko Willink, the famous Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink's books are such required reading, in my opinion, because of the ownership of, he said there's no bad teams. And of course, he was a Navy SEAL team kind of leader. He said there's no bad teams. There's bad leaders. There's no bad teams, just bad leaders. And when I first heard that, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I've been around some pretty bad kids. But he's right. Because and when you really check your ego and you really just say, okay, and you swallow that cold, hard truth pill, you're like, yeah, you're right. You know what? There's no such thing. And there's no such thing as a bad class, bad teachers. I've seen the same kids be in different teachers' classes or play for different coaches and are completely different people. Why? Did they just, what changed? Do they have a little switch? Are they A/B testing their coaches? No, they don't even know what A/B and split testing is. The relationship and the respect and the environment that was created by this coach versus that coach or this teacher versus that teacher, the expectations, the follow through on expectations. This coach micromanages everything. They don't want to be around that. They like this coach because this coach respects him, gives him some autonomy, and doesn't yell at him in front of their peers, maybe puts them on blast a little more quietly off to the side, right? I've had so many teachers come to me over the years and say, hey, Bo, I got a problem with this kid. this kid's being a problem. Can you work with him? I said, I don't need to work with him. I don't need to start working with him. I already work with him. And they said, what do you mean? I go, well, he's in my class. And they go, yeah, I noticed that. How's he in your class? He's great. Oh, well, maybe it's because he has your class at 1:00 instead of 10:00. I go, or maybe it's because of the environment that I've created. And I also don't go after them in front of the peers. One of the biggest things I tell teachers is they want to attack kids in front of their peers. They want to go after them in front of their buddies. And I go, don't do it. Don't do it. So it's just kind of in a nutshell. I think that looking at things differently, like I kind of went and talked about kind of different things there, but looking at them differently because of like walking, and getting their mindset versus their shoes or all the different things. I hope this, and I'm passionate, as you can tell, about this, and I don't have all the answers, and I'm excited. I'm a learner. Like, I'm reading books, I'm learning. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of knowledge at coaching, and I've been teacher of the year 3 times. I was supervisor of the year of teachers. I supervised and evaluated teachers. Public school, I evaluated them, and I got voted super. You know what? I have so much still to learn, but I'm passionate about some of these things that I feel very firm about. Notice I'm not talking about a lot of things because remember, I'm going deep, not wide. I don't need to be, I'm not the jack of all trades. I feel like I'm pretty good. I've kind of started to not master, but really be good at some of these. So that's what I'm passionate about. If you start asking me about, the one-legged stance for catchers, the one knee down stuff, I'm going to back off. I'm be like, I don't know enough about it. You know what? I've heard some things here. I've heard some pros and cons. You know what I mean? So I think it's important. So I think the listeners, I hope you're hearing that. Like, this is my lane. I know to stay in my lane. When the roofer came to fix my house the other day, I didn't act like I knew anything about roofs. You know what? I acted like I was as dumb as a 6-year-old. But it's because so I just like the listeners to hear that. I'm passionate about some of these things that I've really over the years taken a liking to, and I think I've been blessed to be put in a situation with so many great experiences, environments, and mentors, and the way of thinking, and books and podcasts to be able to really drill down on this stuff. So I hope that kind of helps, kind of explain some of the kind of the confidence and the certainty on some of these, these acute subjects that I think can help us everywhere in life, actually. So.
There's so many nuggets within that. So I'm just going to give a quick recap, and that's how you articulated that. I'm not going to ask any more questions because that was just a plethora of really, really good information. Off the top of my head, I believe Bobby Crosby won the Rookie of the Year with the Athletics, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so that was it. One of my mentors, a guy that I hold very, very firmly within my life, not only within my life as a student, but also my life and my relationship with Jesus Christ, is life is relationships. The rest is just details. Nothing else matters if we're not building those respectful relationships. Within that, however, when you talk about, hey, it's not walk a mile in their shoes, it's walk a mile in their and kind of their thought process. I don't want to be that guy, but some would say clear the mechanism.
Yeah.
So
Great movie, by the way.
Oh, incredible movie. And there's so many things that you touched on, but how we need to look at that is within those very, very, because we can go into a laundry list of ideas. Everything is a simplistic outlook, and everything from that simplistic outlook, from all those opportunities, is from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So without that opportunity, and obviously everyone who's listening to this, and I know some people who are going through some stuff very personally at the moment, our direction's pretty confusing at the moment. And with that being said, though, we're not ever going to be confused. It's just maybe from the lens of, at the moment, hey, I just don't know where to go with this. But if I trust in his plan, he's always going to give us those kind of guiding principles. And I think that's what coaching is. It's like, it's us guiding, but it's guiding through, hey, how do we attack this problem for this athlete, and not, hey, as a group. As coaching, we always think, hey, everything's a group activity. It is But if we're only as good as our weakest link, so if we're not able to attack that weakest link where they're at, the whole team's going to be diminished. Because at the end of the day, if that guy is actually your kind of your spark plug and you're not able to use him as a spark plug, there's a problem, and that's going to reflect on the whole group. So with all that being said, I think the last thing that I would love to do is, if you're okay with it, I'd love to pray with you. And
yeah, Coach, I want to add something to what you just said there. You just gave me I got an epiphany, and I would say this. One of the things, and I'm looking more so, and I think I can learn from you, is to be more of a player first transformational coach. My dad was that way, but I went through a long spell of playing for some great organizations and programs that didn't really emphasize that team culture as much. And so I just thought that's how you coached. And so I didn't, it was about 10 years ago where I really started going, oh man, yeah, I love the X's and O's and drill design and swings and pitching delivery. I love all that stuff. But, I need to, the X's and the O's, love it. But I need to be more about the Jimmies and the Joes. And that piece is something I'm working on. So I look forward to my development over moving forward, how to be better with that and continue. But I would say this, you talked about trust and faith. You have this anchor. A lot of people go, well, I'm in a men's group, and they go, well, why are you, what is it about, God, or what is it about, this faith? What is it important about? Well, what's important? I meet old dudes, wise. One of them, Fred, he passed away sadly, but he was 90. Fred was 93, passed away about 6 months ago. And, but I'm like by far the youngest. I'm 45, going on 46, and I'm the youngest in this group. Talk about wisdom. And we meet every Friday morning, 6:30. And we talk about faith the other day, and trust and faith. And I said, if anything, it's an anchor. It's an anchor and clarity and calmness, like you mentioned. It's a faith, it's trust, it's an anti-anxiety. And let me tie this into coaching, right? Being a good coach or a good teacher or even a good parent is consistency and trust and faith. The players that show up to practice, they have faith in you as a coach that you are going to be consistent. You're going to be who you are. They have trust that you're not going to put them on blast. Players that play loose and free and are smiling when they show up to your practice or your class, or when your kids run up to give you a hug or not. It's, do they have that faith that you are going to be the person that they want you to be? And that doesn't mean they really don't. They'd like you to be buddy and take them to ice cream every day, but that's not what they need. Are you going to be the person they need, right? Are you going to be the coach they need? They want that deep down. Maybe they can't articulate it. Maybe it's subconscious, but they need to have faith. And we got to give them the faith and to be able to trust us as coaches that every time they show up to practice or a game, we're going to be consistent. We're going to stick to our principles. We're going to do what's best for them, and we're going to keep their well-being in mind. And the teams, and so I think it kind of ties back to our trust and faith in God. You can have this trust and faith in God, and that keeps us calm. That keeps us like we're okay. I can go out. I can go out there and take on the day because I have this anchored faith and trust. Okay. Well, now when the players show up, and you're a coach that they're not sure is going to lose it or not. I've heard stories over the years of kids that say, like, I didn't know if my dad was going to blow a gasket when I would come home. Like, it would be like, you just never knew. And we were walking on eggshells. Our entire childhood I'm like, oh man, I didn't have that. I didn't have that in my household. So my parents never once, not one time were they different. There was some yelling and there might have been a belt when I was younger, but there was never like aggression. Part of that is they didn't drink and do drugs. And I think big part of it's drinking. That's another topic. But it was that I had faith and trust that when I got home and my parents were there and I walked up to my dad, I knew what I was getting. And so coaches, just be consistent, be even keel, always be there for what's best for the kid. And just think about, hey, I want this to be an environment where the kid knows what they're getting into. They're excited and because they're kids, they don't know. They're worried about everything. They're like, they don't know. Haven't lived long enough to see patterns yet. So when you don't have patterns and you don't see longevity, you're not sure. You're anxious. You're not sure how it's going to turn out, right? When we go through tough times, I'm 45, I go through a tough time. I know, tough time, this too shall pass. It's going to pass. I know that. But when you're 9 years old, you don't think you don't know. You're like, this is the end of the world. You're 16. This is the end of the world. So I think that it's important that we are somebody that players can have faith in on a human level and trust in. So sorry, Coach, I just wanted to add that. You just made me have that kind of epiphany of like, you're talking about faith and trust in God in a human way on a much lower level, but very impactful level as coaches, teachers, and parents. They need to have faith and trust in us that we're going to always do what's best for them. And we're going to be thinking about it from their perspective and be consistent.
No, absolutely. I'll pray you out, and then we'll get after it. So, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, thank you very much for all the gifts and all these intangibles that we've been able to touch on through this conversation. I just truly want to come to you, and I really appreciate this platform to be able to really use all these gifts and talents that you've not only bestowed upon me, but also my guest, and in this case, Coach Bo, and just everyone that's listening on the other side. And hopefully that there's some impactful message that you really wanted us to not only describe to all these different individuals listening, but also through the lens of life and all the gifts that you've given us through those to be able to talk about our failures, talk about our successes, but talk about it in a lens that's giving back to not only through your grace, but also hardship and being that light for people who are not always going to be in those types of situations. Just truly grateful for all those different types of things that you've bestowed upon us. The big thing for us is like you give us that opportunity to be lifelong learners, and us as coaches, like that's what we try to strive for. And there's so much that you do through that, through the people that you bring upon our lives, through the people that you've taken out of our lives. Like there's so many lessons that you've taught us, and we just need to be grateful for every one of those opportunities, because that's turning us into the person that we are today, and is going to continue to be the person and help us shine that light in others that some are not going to have that light. So let us be the light for the people who don't 100% understand it. As always, thank you for my family. Thank you for everyone that has made an impact in my life, Coach Bo's life, and everyone that's listening. I'm truly grateful for everything that you've bestowed upon us, and I'm just excited to see what we do in the future. Through your name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Coach.
Absolutely. Coach Bo, once again, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm just very, very thankful for what you were able to talk about, but at the same time, what we were able to also really dive into from the lens of the low-hanging fruit and then extending that all the way to the vine. And I think that's the beauty of what this podcast is, and I think that's what it's turning into. And I just appreciate you letting me do it differently. I know it's a little bit different than most. Maybe there's something that you took away of how we went about this conversation that you can implement into yours. And I'm just truly grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I'm grateful too. And I really like how this played off of the interview, the discussion we had when you came on the 80/20 Baseball podcast, and you resonated with so many listeners because you went a path a little different. You did go a path of like your story, and the listeners related to your story, and so many people related to your story. So I took that away like, hey, people love a story. They like that. And so I think this played off your story as a kid and the challenges and through high school and college as from the player's perspective, I think really played off kind of our discussion here, where I was kind of more coming from kind of that veteran coach teacher perspective. I think the two really mixed together. I'd love to have you back on my podcast, and I'd love to come back on Clear the Mechanism. Speaking of which, I think I'm going to go watch for the love of the game here tonight, but I'd love to have you back on, and I'd love to come back on here if you have me.
Once again, I just really appreciate the conversation that we were able to have. And with all that being said, I know both of us have pretty busy schedules, so I'll let you get back to everything that you need to do today. But at the end of the day, I just want to let you know that it was truly a blessing to be able to hop on here. And I did really enjoy how they were able to connect both of our conversations, not only the one I had on your episode, but also the one that you were able to have on mine. And And as always, the co-host is always the end all be all. And if he's smiling, everyone should be smiling. So
I love it. Well, thanks for having me on, Coach. I look forward to the next time.
absolutely. Once again, this is your host, Coach Ryan Vondercheck, the one and only host of Clear the Mechanism. As always, don't be afraid to be yourself. And at the end of the day, continue to find your relationship and your true identity in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.